Well, good evening, brothers and sisters. I wonder if something has gone wrong with the sound system. Can you all hear me okay? That makes a big difference, doesn't it? That's what I thought. I've never heard Jerry be weak. Well, praise the Lord. Like so often happens at these meetings, it seems like we just got started on Wednesday evening and we're come down to the last meeting. And I know that my soul has been stirred by these meetings because I have sensed an urgency in these presentations like we've never heard before. And we must have been coming here, how long, Jerry? 10 years? We've been doing these meetings for a long time every summer. It's been years. Yeah, and I've never heard preaching here. I've heard good preaching here at these meetings every year, but I've never heard such a sense of urgency. And I believe it's the Holy Spirit showing us that these events are right upon us. I remember, that's been over 10 years ago. Yeah, so. But you know, there's a grand test coming to the world, isn't there? Each and every individual is going to have to make a decision whether you're going to stand for God's commandments, particularly the fourth commandment, or whether you're going to capitulate to the pagan New World Order Sunday, isn't that right? And you know, the only way that we know when prophecy has been fulfilled is looking at history, isn't it? We're the 6,000-year-old Seventh-day Adventist Church has always been a church of prophecy. And didn't prophecy start right in the Garden of Eden? There was a prophecy of a Redeemer to come. There was all the events through the patriarchs and prophets and all the way down through history. That's been the only way we can validate and verify. And friends, what we've been studying in my presentations has been the fulfillment of Revelation 13. I would recommend that you get all the DVDs from the camp meeting. But what you'll find out in my presentation is that what we have laid a foundation for is that we've talked about the two beasts in Revelation 13. The first one, we clearly identified the papacy, did we not? Second presentation, we showed how the papacy, through all these wars and upheavals and things going on in the world, that what has happened is that every one of these wars have always ended up in the favor of the papacy and their New World Order plans. We've dealt with Bosnia-Herzegovina. Most of you didn't know where to place your feelings there or which side, where the Bosnians were correct or the Serbs were correct. Well, you learned who they were, didn't you? We dealt with Rwanda, with that conflict. You didn't know who was right and who was wrong there and what it was all about. And friends, what we've done since we're down to our last meeting, like I said, this is actually a 7-part presentation that I've had to compress into 3. So I'm taking you clear down to part number 6 tonight. The evidence is overwhelming, and it proves beyond. If we were in a courtroom as attorneys, we would prove our case beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I think that we've proven it already as to what these upheavals in the world have really been about all these years. And so we're going to continue on tonight, dealing with how this beast power is working today. And you know, we've been all around the world with our presentations, and the parts you haven't seen are Latin America. In here, you saw a little of China, you haven't seen Haiti, you haven't seen the Philippines, you haven't seen Australia, New Zealand, the other nations around the world, but I'm going to bring it a little bit closer to home tonight, and that's the good old United States of America. And so, as we continue on with our study, you all know, and Brother Graham brought out in his presentation, that it's America that actually initiates the reaching across the abyss to grasp the hands of spiritualism. Didn't we see that quote today? And friends, the United States initiated it. Remember your good old Protestant President Ronald Reagan? Did we decide that was a good old Protestant name, or is that? And who was the president that established Ambassador Wilson to the Vatican during his presidency? It was Reagan, wasn't it? And so the United States reached out its hand over to the papacy and reached across the abyss. And of course, the Catholics have been amazed at how so-called Protestant America has just fallen down for them, isn't it? And of course, if you read your Great Controversy, you're going to sound like an Irish Catholic to you. To realize that's exactly what was predicted. So will the Vatican and the United States rule the world? Well, the Bible has the answers. We continue our program. For those of you who weren't here, one of the things we had pointed out is that in the pagan religions, symbol means more than substance. Symbolism means a lot. And friends, the fact that President Bush is wearing a black suit and the Pope is wearing a white garment, does that mean something? Signifies that the United States is the bad guys and the Vatican is the good guys. And you'll notice when heads of state meet at the Vatican, always they dress in black, including the Queen of England when she was there, which means mourning, penance, all those things enter into it. So picture's worth 1,000 words. Patrick Henry supported freedom of conscience. Am I in your way here, by the way, or can you guys see behind me? Okay. Religion can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force. And isn't that true? Friends, who has the right to dictate how you shall worship your Creator? Only the Creator, isn't that correct? The first 4 commandments are sacred to God. The civil government has no right getting involved in religion. And the last 6 commandments we know are what our civil laws are based on, and that's quite proper for a civil government to administer. But Patrick Henry tells us that you cannot force, it can only be directed by reason and conviction, not by force. And therefore, all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, unpunished and unrestrained by the magistrate. Doesn't that sound a lot like the First Amendment to our Constitution to you? Some of that same concept? You can thank John Locke over in England for a lot of the concepts that Madison and Jefferson incorporated into our constitutional instrument and into those to that First Amendment. Now, Rome plans to Catholicize America. We had proven that in a previous presentation. But haven't you thought it's a little bit strange that we don't have Canadians coming across the border in great numbers, but on our southern border, what do we have coming across the border that they can't seem to stop? Yeah, and about 4,000 a month are coming across that border, and the government just throws up their hands, and they do a lot of talking about it, but they don't take any action. Well, let's just think about this for a moment. What predominant religion are most of those immigrants from south of the border bringing across into America? That's right. And then these undocumented, what do they call them? Undocumented something. Undocumented workers or undocumented citizens. They want to give them the right to vote. And which way do you suppose that's going to skew the election if those people get the right to vote? Towards the Vatican's point of view. Is that not right? Who financed President Jefferson Davis in the South during the Civil War? Friends, that was not a political war. It had political overtones to it. That was a religious war. And the Vatican thought if the South could take down the North in the Union, then they could come in and take over and fill that void and make this a Catholic nation. It was a religious war. Okay? Every war we've seen has had religious overtones to it. It might have politics involved, but it's really religion. So Rome wants to Catholicize America. It says here in The State and Church, which is a book published in 1924 that showed what the Vatican plans were. It says the danger of religious intolerance toward non-Catholics in the United States is so improbable and so far in the future that it should not occupy their time or attention. Well, I'll tell you what, it better start occupying your attention today. You better wake up and see what's really going on here. Madison sees liberty for all and separation of church and state. Religion is not in the purview of human government. It is essentially distinct from it and exempt from its cognizance. A connection between them is injurious to both. And friends, what has always been the result when church and state have united and they've attained both secular and religious power? Persecution to those who are not politically correct. I'll tell you, there's a couple of phrases that I'm hearing that really rankle me these days in our society. One is political correctness, right? The second one is the rule of law. Do you all just accept that concept, or do you question it? Friends, the rule of law is nothing more than 51%, and you control the country. Isn't that right? It's just whatever the Yeah, it's just majority rules, and that's not the Republican form of government that was envisioned for our nation. So even our founding fathers understood this. Now here's what Pope Pius IX said the church has the right to require that the Catholic religion shall be the only religion of the state to the exclusion of all others. Is that not a disturbing statement? I don't agree with that. I hope nobody else in here does either. And our beautiful First Amendment here in separation of church and state. It says, our form of government is one based wholly on the will of the people. How much say do you have in what goes on today? We don't. You're pretty naive if you don't think that the New World Order already has figured out, and the Vatican has already figured out who your next president's going to be. Okay? It says the state is free from all control of the churches. Well, that's not true today, is it? All these principles have been formally condemned by Rome, and that was a 1913 quote, how things have changed a century later. Roman Catholic Church curses liberty. Here Pope Pius IX again. Cursed be those who assert liberty of conscience and of worship and such that maintain that the church may not employ force. Did you see Brother Bergen's presentation at the end of it today, those instruments of torture that had been used to convert Christians, quote unquote, to Catholicism? And yet they think this is absolutely a valid way to convert souls to their quote unquote truth. Friends, there's only two religions in the world. You're either 100% on Christ's side and the truth, or you're 100% on Satan's side, and there's no middle ground, is there? Abraham Lincoln. Do you know who Father Chiniquy was? Okay, have you read his book? Go on Amazon.com if you don't have it and get a copy of it. It's quite a read. Catholic priest that had uncovered the corruption going on in the Archdiocese in Chicago, and he went public with it, and he ended up in a court of law on trumped-up charges. And do you know who his defense attorney was? Young attorney from Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And when Lincoln made monkeys out of those Catholic lawyers, and Chiniquy was found not guilty, Chiniquy broke into tears, literally. And Lincoln said, "Why are you so concerned?" He says, "We've won the case. You've been proven not guilty." And he said, "Oh no," he says, "the Jesuits were here during the whole trial." And he said, "Mr. Lincoln," he said, "you just signed your death warrant." And that came to be true, wasn't it? And here's what Lincoln said: "We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of their noblest sons. I pity the priests when the people realize that they are responsible for the bloodshed in this war." If you think the only issue was slavery, you're crazy. Okay, the issue was over states' rights, number one, in the 10th Amendment more than anything, was it not? But here, this was predicted. Lincoln was very aware of the Jesuit threat to the United States and what the papacy stood for. And you know, I think it comes as no surprise to any of you in here. Do you know what religion John Wilkes Booth and his whole family were? Roman Catholics, friends. Here's the Bishop of St. Louis in 1851. "If Catholics ever gain a sufficient numerical majority in this country, religious freedom is what? It's at an end." Do you know who most of your chiefs of police are in this country, what religion they belong to? Do you know what most of your postmasters, what they belong to? Do you know what most of your judges, yeah, and I can go right on down the line. I showed you the slide in the last presentation that shows that now that in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, the Supreme Court, in fact, most branches of government, you have Roman Catholics in the majority now. So this was predicted many years ago. Religious liberty is integral to the American heritage, is it not? Here's Article 1 of the Bill of Rights. Okay, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I know I have a lawyer in here, and so in law school, I'm sure they talked a lot about this First Amendment. But the Establishment Clause, I could speak for probably 5 hours on that if you wanted to, and we wouldn't even scratch the surface. Because they're always arguing over what exactly does the Establishment Clause mean, isn't that right? And you know, you have a Supreme Court that I don't believe they think the way we do about that Establishment Clause today. Am I right, Counselor? Huh? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What does that mean? It means that the government is not to, number one, establish a state religion, or number two, they're not to favor any religion. Isn't that right? In fact, actually, under the Establishment Clause, you have the right to not even have religion if you want. But friends, we know from reading the Great Controversy that things are going to change, and there are going to be religious laws passed in this country. I know we don't have a national Sunday law yet, but you understand that there are blue laws on the vast majority of states' books, which would, if they were enforced, none of us could meet here on Sunday. Okay? So the on Sunday. I didn't say anything about Sabbath. The blue laws are Sunday closing laws. They could close up this country on Sundays if the states would enforce the laws that are already on the books. Okay? So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's individual, your loyalty is to God, is it not? And He has your first allegiance. Then it goes on, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. You know, there's a lot of bad things you can say about the internet, aren't there? I mean, there are things that are dangerous for our children to see on there and that'll corrupt their little minds. Isn't that true? But I'll tell you what, the canned propaganda we're getting, and that's not preaching the gospel either. But have you not noticed that whether you turn on ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, that they're all given the same news stories? And they're written just about the same way, and they're reading it off a teleprompter? They're just actors reading the script, friends. They're not journalists anymore. And so, as you know, the internet, the one thing it does, and there may be some real wacko ideas out there that get put on the internet, but I'll tell you what, at least if you want to go dig for information, you can at least see all sides of an argument, can't you? Tell you, but the vast majority of people, they're just like lemmings, Graham, in America. I don't know how they are over in Australia. Huh? Lemmings, a little animal that when they get in a rush, they'll just all jump off a cliff together because there's no reasoning. Okay, just like the swine that Jesus put the demons into and they all rushed headlong and died. It's the same thing. So you see that people have lost the ability to think these days in our nation, it seems like. And of course, that you can look at the food supply for that. You can look at this constant drum of propaganda that they're fed in their minds. In school, what are our little children being taught in public school? They're being taught not to think and to be Protestants, which is a Protestant concept. They're being taught to don't be too competitive now. You might hurt somebody's feelings. You know, some people aren't to be different. We're all to be the same. In fact, it's gone so far that even in some of the sports that the kids play now, they don't keep score anymore because they don't want somebody to lose and somebody to win. Is that incredible? I can't imagine when I played baseball not keeping score. I mean, what's the point of getting out there if you're not going to know how you did, you know? But anyway, so we see, though, that also the people have the right to peaceably assemble. This is what the Catholic position is on the Catholic News, 1963. By the way, tell me once again, those of you who were here earlier, who was the president in July of 1963? That's right, he was less than 90 days away from his death. And what was it John Kennedy said to the unions down there in Dallas, Texas, when he was campaigning for election? Did he not say that he was going to put the Constitution above his church? I believe he signed his death warrant just the same way Lincoln did when he said that myself. But here's what the Catholic viewpoint is on our Constitution, we the people. It says, I want to hear some Americans stand up and shout, give us justice, give us decency, and to H with the Constitution. Is that not shocking? That's the position, friends, of the papacy today. Jefferson claims religious liberty for all. God hath created the mind free. I had to hear an amen to that. Okay, all attempts to influence it by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and are a departure from the plan of the holy author, who being Lord of both body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was in his almighty power to do. Let me translate that into English for you. What sets us apart from the animal kingdom in God's creation in Genesis? Is it not the freedom of choice? Didn't God give us the ability to choose whether we would serve him or not? Okay, friends, that's exactly the concept that Thomas Jefferson was putting forward, that you are not to be coerced in your mind, that we have freedom of choice, and it's a plan that God himself instituted, was that you and I need to think and make our decisions for ourselves. Isn't that right? And yet, the papacy, you see the tension here between the two forces. Freedom of religion versus a very controlling religion. Isn't that right? And the papacy also condemns our form of government. Our form of government is one based wholly on the will of the people. The state is free from all control of the churches. All these principles have been formally condemned by Rome. They hate freedom in any source, okay, because they claim that they go back and have the keys of heaven and hell, and Peter was the first pope, and you know that story. I don't have to go through that one for you tonight. Even this deist, Benjamin Franklin, says, when the religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself. And when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, it is a sign, I apprehend, of its being a bad one. Isn't that a profound statement? Friends, I sat in a federal court in Miami for 4.5 days when your brother and my brother, Rafael Perez, was called everything but a Christian, and particularly everything but a Seventh-day Adventist. And because he has the audacity to have a little Hispanic church, and actually they have 3 or 4 churches around the state of Florida, and because he had the audacity to put the name Seventh-day Adventist on the sign out in front of the church, which, by the way, I've never heard him preach anything other than the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, and I believe that's one of the earmarks to tell if you're a Seventh-day Adventist or not. But I heard 4.5 days of testimony that he was probably one of the worst human beings that's ever been seen the face of the earth. And if you think I'm kidding, you ought to get the transcript from the trial and read it over. You'd be shocked. And I'm going to tell you a couple of anecdotes that happened there. Any of you get Vance Farrell's newsletters? Okay, Pilgrim's Rest, you ever heard of Vance Farrell? Okay, do you remember that after the trial that Vance did 3 or 4 of those publications on the trial? Well, I'm going to tell you what I did. I was like a court stenographer, because I'd sat in court all day taking notes, and then I got on the phone with Vance at night, and he and I talked for 2 and 3 hours so I could give him the events of the day, and that's where those newsletters came from. Okay, I was his eyes and, you know, the one on the ground there for him. And I'm going to tell you, I was shocked, because remember now, it wasn't Seventh-day Adventist attorneys who were arguing the case. It was Roman Catholic Ramick, and you can tell me he's converted to some other religion. Friends, the Catholics say, you give me a child until he's 7 and he'll be a Catholic all of his life. Isn't that right? So don't tell me Ramick is anything other than a Roman Catholic. And Ramick got up there, and what happened is that Bob Nixon was on the witness stand for the prosecution. Now, Bob Nixon is the highest attorney at the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists in Silver Springs, Maryland. You all know who Bob Nixon is? I'm seeing some blank looks. Okay, well, he's the highest attorney in the conference. Since he didn't have a license to practice in Florida, they had to use Ramick to actually argue the case. So he's up there as a witness. It came down to the point of where our attorney for Raphael asked one very salient question. He said, Mr. Nixon, he says, what is the basis of authority in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination? Now, if you were the witness on the witness stand and I asked you that, I'm pretty sure you'd give me one of 2 answers. You'd either tell me the Bible or Jesus Christ, I'm pretty sure. Isn't that what you'd say is the basis of authority in the church? Isn't that true? Matthew 28 says, how much power is given to me in heaven and earth? All power is given to Christ. So he's the authority in the church. Do you want to know what Bob Nixon's answer was under oath? He held up a church manual and he said the church manual is the basis of authority in this church. Friends, we had the same reaction you did. In fact, it was a lot louder than you just did, and the judge snapped the gavel down. He says, one more outburst like that, I'm going to empty this courtroom. So we had to sit there quietly. But we were shocked, and it grieved me in my spirit. Well, what happened is that they took a break after Nixon's testimony, and it turned out that Russell Standish and Bob Nixon were roommates back in the old academy days. And so Russell and I and Bob were standing there. And Russell said, Bob, he says, when we were in school, he said, you were one of the most spiritual young men I knew. He says, you knew this truth inside and out. You would stand up for truth. He said, he says, do you really believe that you did not perjure yourself on that stand? And he said, Bob, he says, doesn't your conscience ever bother you? And Nixon looked down at his shoes, and I'm telling you, this is the absolute truth. He said, you know, every once in a while my conscience does bother me. Now, is that an incredible statement from the highest attorney at the conference level? Now, I'm going to tell you one other incident that happened in the court. Raphael was the last witness in the trial. And so, well, let me back up a little bit. Before the trial, rather than testifying in the trial, I was just asked to write what's called an amicus curiae. And I don't think I speak Latin too well. I don't want you to get worried about that. Friend of the court, brief. So I spent all day writing a letter to Judge King, who was the presiding judge in this federal court. And what I did was I took the approach, Judge King, the Honorable King, I said, I just want you to know that about 500 years ago, there was a court in Germany that was used that actually what was a civil case was brought before the Diet in Germany that really was a religious matter that really the king had no business adjudicating. And I said, you know, just be careful that you're not getting sucked into something here that you don't even understand what you're involved in. And I said, number two, I would recommend that you go get a book called The Great Controversy and read it cover to cover before the trial. Well, what happened when we were there at the trial, just so happened Judge King was coming out of his chambers one night, and he walked past me and he said, are you Dennis? You know, why would he know me out of anybody that was there? I said, yes, I am. And he says, well, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. He says, I'm a Roman Catholic. He says, we have been generations of Roman Catholics in my family. And he said, but I'm going to tell you, he says, I read your letter and I took it to heart. And he said, I'm going to tell you one thing. He says, I read that Great Controversy. That book is the truth. Friends, this is a Roman Catholic judge. So in the trial, Raphael was the witness on the stand, and man, the prosecution was just hammering him. And the judge did something I've never seen, because our attorney kept popping up and objecting, because they were just getting personal on their attacks. It wasn't about the facts. It was a personal attack. And I'm telling you, the Great Controversy was played out in that courtroom. And what happened is the judge told both attorneys, and he's used this word. He said, would you please shut up and sit down? Said that to both attorneys. They kind of got a shocked look, looked at each other, and they sat down and shut up. He says, Mr. Perez, Pastor Perez, he called him. And the judge kind of rustles under his desk. He pulls out the Miami Herald, where we had run the Earth's Final Warning ads, 2-page, full-color ads, in the Miami Herald. And he held it up, and he said, Pastor Perez, he says, did your ministry publish this ad in the Miami Herald? And Raphael said, yes, we did, Judge. And the judge asked him, he says, Raphael, he says, is this hate literature? And he says, oh, no, Judge. And then he gave an eloquent, much like Stephen before his stoning, he gave an eloquent appeal and said, oh, no, this is a love letter to warn the people about what's coming upon the earth. It's a surprise to many of them. And he says, this was only our attempt to warn the world. So then he said, thank you, Mr. Perez. And he says, then he looked over at the bench for the GC. And the judge says, do you own the Pacific Press Publishing Association in Nampa, Idaho? Well, proud as peacocks, they sat right up and says, oh, yes, Judge, we certainly do. Very proud of it. And The judge said, thank you. He went back to Raphael. He says, Raphael, he says, where did most of the body copy or text copy come from in this ad? And he says, out of a book called The Great Controversy. And he looked at they looked over at the General Conference, and he says, do you publish a book called The Great Controversy? And then they got a little sheepish. And then he said very profoundly, the judge said, he says, so you expect this Roman Catholic judge, who's a heathen and a publican to you fellows, that if I buy your book and read it, it's the truth, but if this little Hispanic publishes it, that it's hate literature. You could have dropped a pin in that courtroom. I've never heard that before. And he knew that he had him. Okay? So I'm going to tell you, though, that you can just connect the dots here. When Benjamin Franklin said that if a religion will not stand on its own 2 feet, then it must be a bad religion. You tell me why the General Conference feels that it has to take those who are out here just preaching the 3 angels' messages to court. But I'll just let that one lie. Now, we have priests and papacy for USA takeover. By the way, do you see what airlines he's getting out of here? It's Trans World Airlines. Do you know who the major stockholder was in TWA when they were around? The Vatican, friends. Trans World Airlines. Have you ever thought about the name of the airline? Huh? They don't miss a trick. Undoubtedly, it is the intention of the Pope to possess this country. In this intention, he is aided by the Jesuits and all the Catholic prelates and priests. That's 1864. That statement was made. George Washington, bless his heart. Every man conducting himself as a good citizen and being accountable to God alone for his religious opinions ought to be protected in worshiping the deity according to the dictates of his own conscience. Isn't that a beautiful statement? How true is that? And yet, Papal Rome still wants to make America Catholic. Our work is to make America Catholic, and our hearts shall leap toward it with crusader enthusiasm. 1890. Now we have Billy Boy here. Okay. Time Magazine. Would you please tell me once again who the largest shareholder is in Time Warner? The Vatican. Who controls the news service that feeds all these parrot-like news organizations around the world today? Guess who owns the news feeds? Yeah, we don't have UPI and AP and all the different press outlets anymore. They're getting it from one source, Reuters generally, and that's Roman Catholic owned. Isn't that an amazing coincidence? Friends, we're like sheep going to slaughter because most Americans that are out there worrying about the Lakers game tomorrow night and what's going on around in the world, they have no clue what you folks are learning here in this room. I said we're tying the dots together, and so on Time Magazine, is this not just a mouthpiece for the Vatican? Their headlines, their articles are sending you a message from the papacy. And it says, and he, the second beast, who's whom? The United States, had power to give life unto the image of the beast. Okay, that didn't say the mark of the beast, did it? The image of the beast is something different from the mark. You ought to go do a little research into Sister White's writings and find out what the difference is between those two things. And she also told us that there's a lot more to the image of the beast than she even was shown that we're going to have to realize as we go through the time. You better start waking up, Adventist friend, because time's running out. But how does a power give life unto anything? Through its legislative process, isn't that right? Its laws. That's how it speaks as a dragon. It says, so that the image of the beast should both speak and cause. The image of the beast is a lot like the first beast, is it not? The first beast was a persecuting power. What's the second beast going to do? It's going to force, isn't it, Sister Roberta? It's a forceful power. So it should both speak, so it's going to make religious laws and then enforce those religious laws that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Death decree. And here's the question, has America become a global bully? You name me one other superpower that can stand up to America today. Name me one. I can't think of any, can you? I know there's some wannabes out there in the wings, but you know what? I believe that in a Lord of prophecy, don't you? And he said in these last days, the United States is going to be the enforcer. We're going to get the Sunday laws here first, and then we're going to force it on the rest of the world. Isn't that right? It's the U.S. way or no way. And no wonder we're so hated around the world, brother. No kidding. That's exactly who it is. And that C on, by the way, that C on his chest doesn't mean Condoleezza Rice either. Okay. Second beast submits to the... Wait a minute. I've made a mistake here on this slide. Hold it. I thought Bubba said he was a Baptist, a Southern Baptist. Oh, I've been in some Baptist churches. I've never seen this before. Have you? Huh? Who's administering the sacrament to him there? Catholic priest. Who trained him? Who was his handler?
What do you call him, Bubba? What does that mean?
That's just a Southern term. They call their men Bubba down there. It's just, yeah. I know your cat was, Bubba was sleeping on my pillow more than once in Australia. I caught him. Your Bubba's a bad boy. Yeah. All right. No, I'm not making fun of your cat when I do that. Okay, Bubba and I ended up good friends before we left there. All right. So the two beasts of Revelation 13 unite against artificial birth control. Friends, this is Wilson, the ambassador to the Vatican that Reagan put in. And you know what? It says that in response to concerns of the Vatican, the Reagan administration agreed to alter its foreign aid program to comply with the church's teachings on birth control. That's just one little drip in the pond, isn't it? When our government took its policy, and because the Vatican strongly suggested it, they said, okay, well, we'll change our position on birth control. And that's just the start of it, isn't it? American policy was changed as a result of the Vatican's not agreeing with our policy, Wilson explains. American aid programs around the world did not meet the criteria the Vatican had for family planning. The administration consulted with the Vatican on other matters as well. I just wonder what those other matters might entail. Huh? Yes, brother. Well, because it's the people pouring over our southern border, it's an invasion through immigration. And they want more Catholics. That's always been the Catholic Church's position, to have lots of children, right? So you can outnumber those dirty Protestants, right? That's always been their position. Now, who's the international policeman today? Huh? No. United States. Whose troops are in Iraq primarily? Okay, your 5 troops went home. Your coalition of the willing. Okay, we've got 180,000. Yeah, okay. But who has been the international policeman? Been the United States of America, hasn't it? And the swing to the right, I'm telling you, it's it's scary. And our government and the concept of our Constitution was based on checks and balances, wasn't it? It's supposed to be. Friends, it's dangerous. I don't care whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans or the Independents. When you get a party into power too long, they get too much power, don't they? You lose your checks and balance. And I'll tell you, America's all cranked up over this presidential election, whether it's going to be Obama or McCain. I'll tell you what you ought to be concerned about if you're into politics is if Obama gets elected and then all of a sudden there's a big swing in Congress over to where they have the majority, to where they can just override a veto or they can do all that stuff, then we're in big trouble just as much as when the Republicans had too much power. You need that balance. Okay, you may not agree with their political positions, but if you don't have a buffering, then you can run into a dictatorship. And, I don't know what else you call this last 8 years of what we've had. I'll let you fill in the blank on that one. Does Bush seem to care about what anybody else says? He just ramrods through what he wants. First Amendment separation of church and state under threat as America returns to God. And remember, I'm sorry, my memory's failing me again. Who's the largest shareholder in Time Magazine, Time Warner? The Vatican. And so they're saying, has the separation of church and state gone too far? What's that telling you, American friend? Gone too far, then we need to back off from it somewhat, right? Ruby Ridge, Idaho. This is real close to us. Where our church is, this is less than 10 minutes away where this happened. Everybody remember Ruby Ridge? Randy Weaver, part of a radical Sabbath-keeping sect. Isn't it amazing that it's always Sabbath keepers involved in these sieges? Okay? Randy Weaver was set up by the federal agents. Somebody sold him a gun that was sawed off just about an inch too short for what the law said. And they used that as the pretext to go in and commit siege against him. Has anybody ever heard of the Posse Comitatus Act? Okay? Huh? Is the United States supposed to use its military against its own citizens? The police have the right to stop crooks. I agree with that. But friends, you're never to turn the military might loose on your own population. It's against our Constitution. And yet at Ruby Ridge, Idaho in 1992, Lon Horiuchi was the sharpshooter for the FBI, hit this lady right between the eyes while she was holding baby Sarah, and it was only that Randy was right there to catch the baby as she was going down. And his wife's head was virtually blown off by that shot. What had she done? Did she buy an illegal weapon? She was there. They'd laid siege to the house. I mean, you should have seen all the military equipment up there on Ruby Ridge, and none of us could get anywhere near it because they said, oh no, this is restricted area, military operation going on. Friends, something stunk with that deal right from the beginning. And then their son Sam, 14 years old, what was he guilty of? Had he had any due process? Had he been accused of anything? Had he had a jury of his peers to hear the case? None of that. This young boy and his dog, and he was shot in the back, by the way. They didn't even shoot him in the front. And he and his dog were killed. And you know, one brave woman, there was some outcry to this. Who stands for the murders of Vicki and Sam Weaver? Well, they brought Horiuchi into court, but guess what? Not guilty. He was just discharging his duties as a federal officer. I'm not here to talk about all this stuff, but you know what? We better wake up and realize what's happening to our hard-fought freedoms. That our forefathers gave their lives, their fortunes, and everything they could for our freedoms. And friends, they are going like lightning. It's going quickly now. How about Waco? Papal warning to the cults, huh? Did the government go too far? We were in Australia at Surfers Paradise the day this happened, when the fire started. Mary and I. It was early in the morning over there when we just happened to turn on ABC News. I'm not talking ABC News over here. I'm talking Australian Broadcasting Corporation. We saw on the first news clip the CS gas that, by the way, it's banned under the Geneva Convention. We can't use it on the Iraqis, but you know, lo and behold, our own government could use it on these people. Did I agree with David Koresh? No, I didn't. I think he was a nut and a wacko. Okay, and you can have your own opinion on that. But I'll tell you what, I don't see where he was ever guilty of anything in a court of law. Did you? And particularly the other 80-plus people that were in that compound, I don't see that they were guilty of anything. And yet they pumped the tear gas, the CS gas in there till they got it so loaded, and we saw the fire come out of the front of the tank that actually ignited the gas through the front door. That Australian broadcaster says those blankety-blank Yanks, he said it right on your television down there. He says those stupid Yanks have done it again. And you know what? They only showed it once. We never saw the clip again. That one slipped out. Okay? But we saw what happened with our own eyes. Listen to remember, the media. Huh? How about if like Graham was saying, they come and take your laptop computer, feed some child pornography files onto your hard drive, and say, oh, that Dennis is a pedophile. Look at this. We found it on his computer. What can I say? Huh? And how about if I end up on Fox News and they say, these are the kind of creeps that are preaching the Sabbath? And what's most of the public going to think? Well, he must be guilty. They're accusing him of it, right? Friends, that's inquisitorial law. That's not constitutional law, by the way. But here the media, Time Magazine again, oh my God, they're killing themselves. Okay? Now listen to the subheadline. The sun didn't blacken nor the moon turn red, but the world did come to an end just as their prophet had done what? Promised. Okay? Do you see the subtle hint there to the rest of us? You get up and preach these apocalyptic type sermons and you educate the people, we're going to be painted with the same paintbrush here as David Koresh was. Who knows what kind of false accusations are going to be brought against us. The price of fanaticism, is that a flattering picture of Koresh? Not very flattering. Hasn't shaved for a while. He looks like his hair's all disheveled. That's not very flattering, is it? The price of what? Huh? What are we going to be called? Graham gave you the quote in his presentation. What are we going to be called? Heretics, extremists, fanatics. Isn't that right? Just for standing up because you love Jesus and you know the truth. Now that extremists are willing to use weapons of mass destruction. Huh? Hello? Did you notice that in Time Magazine before? You're just sitting there blank. Weapons of mass destruction. Where have we heard that term in the last 8 or 9 years? Exactly. The same exact thing. Now that extremists are willing to use weapons of mass destruction, they have crossed a threshold that experts have watched with dread for 2 decades. It's not talking about Saddam Hussein and the weapons they never found. It's talking about David Koresh. And by the way, yes. And by the way, do you know where the initial phone call came from that started this whole fiasco? There's a lady by the name of Shirley Burton that works at the General Conference in Public Relations that phoned the FBI, and that's what got the ball rolling. Huh? We have more to fear from. I'm glad you're studying. Pope warns against sects and new religious groups. The proselytizing of the sects and new religious groups of America is a grave hindrance to the work of evangelization. What do you suppose he means by evangelization? We're standing in the way of what the Roman Catholic Church is trying to do, friends. And what he means is that there are independent religious groups that are hindering the papacy's drive to take over the world. The success of proselytism by the sects and new religious groups in America cannot be ignored. Little known group, little known to the Catholics. Anybody read the manuscript releases lately, or the unpublished testimonies, or any of those? Huh? Okay. It demands of the church on the continent a thorough study to be carried out in each nation and at the international level. So U.S. Army tanks helped burn down Waco, and men and women and children die. Now, if there's a murder, God forbid, but if there's a murder in Coos Bay, what normally happens with the police? Isn't that when the yellow tape goes around and you're not allowed in that crime scene, and they even looking for hairs and little evidence and all that, right? They spend weeks on this stuff, right? Collecting evidence. Well, let's see what happened here. Number one, the FBI used chemical banned for war. And that's not in some radical paper, by the way. Well, they're radicals, all right. But the Washington Times, is that a frontline newspaper in America? Friends, that's not some off-the-wall little disgruntled group. That's in the Washington Times. That it's a chemical ban for war. Cult's children faced hell. Okay? And so we find out what happens. Angry callers flooded phone lines when the Waco blaze started. David Koresh was often seen downtown in Waco, Texas. They could have arrested him and picked him up, and he would have been docile, wouldn't he? And then what happened to the survivors? The ones they didn't kill off, they stuffed them away in a prison somewhere. Friends, this sounds like the Inquisition to me, doesn't it to you? Or maybe a practice run for the Inquisition? Huh? How to get better at dealing with these heretics and extremists and fanatics? They got stuffed away. And isn't this interesting? The Waco massacre happened exactly 50 years after the Warsaw Uprising. Symbol is more than substance in the pagan religions, friends. Do you think that just happened that way, or do you think it was planned that way? Uh-huh. And the Holocaust Museum in New York opened 72 hours after the Waco massacre. Isn't that amazing that it was all ready to go? And here are your protesters, Federal Butchers Incorporated. The people were really mad around Waco over this, what had happened. Remember your crime scene investigations? Huh? 1 day later, after all this carnage had taken place and 80 plus people had died, the bulldozers were in there, the evidence was gone, not one piece collected, it was buried in a big pit, and that was the end of the case. Bring down Building 7. Didn't I hear Graham talk? I mean, come on, you guys, wake up. We're gonna, believe me, brother, I'm getting to that one. I'm not done yet. Waco tape angers Reno. Okay, when she found out that they'd used the CS gas and this fire had happened, she really got upset. But you know, it was a little bit late because all those precious little ones were gone, weren't they? Yeah. Just like the papacy will kill you to save your soul. Okay. Reno, who has not been so determined to save a child since her SWAT teams burned 20 other children to death at Waco in '93. That incredible hypocrisy. You guys can get up and preach this as well as I can. You know what's going on. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Butch. Well, maybe Bubba would work there too. I don't know. But anyway. Okay. Clinton gets up, almost in tears. What a terrible mistake Waco was. Of course, there was no logistics involved, right, to get all those tanks in there. Oh, yeah, we got a whole bunch of tanks hanging around Troy, Montana, right? Yeah, and all those armored personnel carriers and all the equipment that it took. Oh, it just happened. It was a tragic mistake. Right. Friends, symbol is more than substance in the pagan religions. What does that mean? And by the way, just as a bonus, I'm not going to charge you for tonight. I haven't got to the papal colors and all that type of stuff for the New World Order, but I'm going to tell you that a blue background is Mary's color, and the gold means Babylon. Believe me, that ATF flag being those colors is very significant. Roberta, am I right or am I wrong? Those are Mary's colors, friends, and they're saying that they have conquered now these renegades and these heretics. And then Bill comes out and gives us the warning. I am very sorry for the loss of life which occurred at the beginning and at the end of this tragedy in Waco. I hope very much that others who will be tempted to join cults will be deterred by the horrible scenes they have seen over the last 7 weeks. So hopefully you'll be deterred. No wonder we have so few people at this camp meeting, huh? Because people have been deterred. Yeah, absolutely. And then Chafee, who's another weak noodle in Congress, he's another lily-livered, I don't know what term to use. Give me a term from Australia. Wally. He's a Wally. He's a buffhead. Okay. 2 weeks after the massacre at Mount Carmel compound in Waco, John Chafee, a senator from Rhode Island, called for a new law that would be a nationwide ban on handgun ownership. Let me give you a little quiz here for your memory. Do you think NAFTA has been beneficial to the United States of American economy? Who do you suppose was the weak weasel that cast the deciding vote as a so-called independent that put NAFTA into effect? That was the vote right there, was from Chafee. Okay? Yeah, it would prohibit sale, possession, importing, and exporting of handguns. Praise God for Bill Hughes, amen, for his secret terrorist book. Now we get to Oklahoma City. Okay? You know, I'm an airline pilot, not an explosives expert. But I'm going to tell you, 5,000 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer in the back of a Ryder truck is impossible to do that much carnage to a big building. Okay, and I think anybody with any kind of reasoning understands that. Weren't these terrible, tragic scenes that we witnessed? Look at this little one expiring in this fireman's arms. You guys are ahead of me on the slides. I'll get there in a minute. You're right. The blood of innocence. And then now, what's this telling us? Who did Timothy McVeigh? I don't know who he was. I don't know that he's dead today, to be honest. I've heard things about that, but I don't know. But what paintbrush did they paint him with? Wasn't it with the Patriot movement in this country? Is there something wrong with being patriotic for our Republican form of government? There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's not prohibited in the Bible. When I hear the Star-Spangled Banner, my heart skips a couple of beats. I'm proud of what this country was founded on. But friends, now the face of terror. accused bomber Timothy McVeigh, and then of course they make sure that they let you know that these little ones were murdered in cold blood and he's the perpetrator, right? Who are they? Well, now those who, even if misguided, don't they have a right to have their own opinions and thoughts on things? Yet they're criminals before being to a court of law, aren't they? Look at all these friends of his, supposedly, that are in on this. Well, I got some shocks for you here. And now Time Magazine, the news organ for the Vatican, portrays anybody who's patriotic as a bunch of fools, and just that there's something wrong with being patriotic. Isn't that right? Enemies of the state. What's that? And it's linking it right to the Patriot movement here. Okay? Enemies of the state. Right there in the media. They just have this drumbeat going that's making them out to be, some kind of, like they're somehow outside outlaws. Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Is that, even for a non-lawyer, that's pretty easy to understand, isn't it? But what kind of debates do we have going on today? Now, Americans are asked by the government to give up freedoms in place of security. How safe is safe? Americans must decide how much freedom they are willing to trade for more security. I know. And then, of course, this is a good man, Ben Parton. And he said 4 bombs exploded inside. He's been an explosive expert for years, a structural engineer. He understands these things. And we all know what was on the, what was on the seismograph there at the University of Oklahoma, do we not? It was ba-boom. It wasn't just boom. Okay, it was ba-boom. You better go look. Okay, and the way the columns were taken out, this is the only possible explanation as to how the building could have collapsed the way it did. Not a 5,000-pound fertilizer bomb in a rented Ryder truck out in front that's some distance from the front door. And isn't this interesting? Several reports have surfaced in which witnesses say that the ATF was told not to come to work on the morning of the bombing. Catherine E. Millette, an EMT, was waiting with her ambulance to transport victims to area hospitals. As 2 agents walked by, she heard one of them say to the other agent, "Is that why we got the page not to come in today?" Tiffany Bible, also a paramedic, approached an ATF agent in front of the building and expressed her concern for the other ATF agents in the building. He told her, "No, we weren't in there today." Sworn affidavit, friends. Not just an opinion, that's a sworn affidavit. And then, Frank, yes? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Okay? Now, Governor Keating, in a television interview shortly after the bombing, Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating, a former FBI agent and previously number 2 at the Justice Department, and therefore previously over the ATF, the Secret Service, and the U.S. Marshal's Office, said, "The reports I have is that one device was deactivated, and apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device." You only heard that once, and they yanked him off the news really quickly. So what are the dilemmas that we have to solve here? Well, number 1, 2 explosions were recorded on the Richter scale, clearly. The ATF agents were absent from the Murrah building offices the day of the explosion. 3 unexploded military bombs were found in the building by the Oklahoma fire chief and reported on news. A military-type temporary camp 50 miles outside of Oak City with a Ryder truck inside was photographed from the air. There's a private pilot flying over. I'm going to show you the picture in a minute. It was a day, just days before the bombing, Graham. And an FBI scientist, Dr. Mary Tungle, believes explosive evidence taken from the scene was deliberately contaminated at the FBI laboratories. Well, there's a lot of questions left here, isn't there? And friends, remember, I'm talking about Revelation 13. But I want you to be aware of what's really happening. We need to understand these things. Then, Texas congressman discovers U.S. government plan for nationwide raids against militia groups 1 month before the Oklahoma bombing. Okay, Stockman from Texas. And I'll tell you what, after he went public with this, you never heard of him again. He's long gone. And then the judge refused to follow what jurisprudence dictates that he has to do in a trial, he refused to do it because the defense didn't get the right to produce evidence showing multiple conspirators involved. They blocked the evidence from ever coming into the trial. Judge Match, who presided over the McVeigh, Oklahoma City bombing trial, refused to allow the defense to introduce evidence of a broader conspiracy. They did, however, introduce embarrassing evidence of a dismembered leg in military uniform that was found in the bombed building. You ever seen that before? Yeah, that went into evidence, and it's in the court record if you want to go read the transcript. And then a day of mourning followed the inevitable call for Congress to immediately pass the Omnibus Anti-Terrorist Act. Okay? Clinton calls for powers to fight terrorism. What do we hear over and over, friends? President Clinton prodded Congress to move swiftly on his anti-terrorism legislation and avoid political endless quibbling over details. We must not doodle or delay. Congress must act and act promptly. And man, they had it through like greased lightning. Yeah, and we're still arguing over No Child Left Behind for 8 years in the Congress. And they can't really make up their mind on that stuff in the educational bill. But yet this went through lickety-split. Clinton signs bill for war on terrorism. Armed FBI and ATF now going after Americans who oppose the New World Order. Those look like policemen to you, by the way? Yeah, exactly. They don't want to be identified. FBI turns aggressive on terror. Here's a listing of the active terrorist group, or patriot groups back then in 1997. But the 95 Oklahoma City bombing has led the agency to broaden its approach. Informants and a variety of laws are part of the mix. I mean, they're telling you what they're doing right there, and most people don't understand it. And so what happened with the evidence? Did they have a thorough investigation of the building? Down she went, plowed under, and gone again, just like Waco. And you know, the Oklahomans, 10,000 Oklahomans have signed a petition demanding a grand jury inquest into the believed possible government involvement in the bombing of the Murrah building and a government cover-up. You know where that petition went? Nowhere. And remember, down in Tasmania, our Australian friends, remember that wild shooter that was on Prozac, Bryant? Same thing. The evidence was destroyed very quickly after that massacre that occurred in Tasmania. So what's wrong at the FBI? How did they get it so wrong on the Iraq War, the weapons of mass deception? Oh, excuse me, the weapons of mass destruction. How'd they get it so wrong, friends, so many times? Huh? I'll tell you why. Because too many Roman Catholics are working for the Papal New World Order in there. That's why. These are mistakes that are being made on purpose, the way I have it figured out. And of course, your FBI director, Louis Freeh, the previous one, member of Opus Dei and a Catholic. Isn't that interesting? So the media calls papal treachery at the FBI sloppy work. Why are things not working? Why do we have such sloppy work at the FBI? And then Charles Grassley, he used to be a senator here, Senator Charles Grassley, Republican from Indiana, charged the suspension was a reprisal against Whitehurst, who was a government whistleblower because he wanted to bring the truth, but by exposing the truth concerning the Oklahoma City bombing. It is alleged the FBI agents David Williams and James Thurman tampered with his evidence to fit with the government's story of a single truck bomb. The FBI never sent their top explosives expert to Oklahoma because he was an honest man and would have found evidence from the bombs inside. Friends, wouldn't you think you'd send something huge like this, you'd send your best possible people? Well, we're down to the end of our presentation. We can see there's a great controversy here, can we not? You're either on Christ's side or you're on the devil's side. Now, I've not shown this to make a political story tonight, but I want to show you that the workings of the papacy is going on right here in the United States. And to deny it would be absolutely insane. I mean, the evidence just tells us, leads us somewhere else. But you know, Jesus still has the world in his hands, does he not? He's the way, the truth, and the life. And he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Friends, we have the one who is our elder brother and who loves us He's closer than a brother. The one who died on Calvary for us for our sins. The one who's in the most holy place in heaven tonight, pleading the merits of his blood for his believing people. And the one who's going to come as a conquering king. Which side of the controversy do you choose to be on? I want to be on Christ's side. And you know there's a day coming when we're going to look up and it says, and it shall be said in that day, Lo, this is our God. We have waited for him and he will save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation. Friends, do we have a more sure word of prophecy? All the talks I've given you, have they not been prophecy fulfilled? We're proving our case, friends, that this is exactly correct. What we've been given as the remnant people in these last days, that we have a more sure word of prophecy. Whereunto it's good that you take heed unto it. And Jesus stands at the door of the heart and he knocks. Isn't that right? Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And you know, we've had appeal after appeal at this camp meeting. And me, for one, I'm not so sure we're going to have a camp meeting next year. I'm not talking about financial things. I'm talking about, I don't know that we're going to have a First Amendment by this time next year. And you know, we could all end up in the who's gal for trying to get together to do this. I don't know. We may have a camp meeting next year, but I'm just saying things are coming pretty quickly now. And I think a year from now when we compare notes, we're going to say this was probably the good old days when gas was only $4. Okay? Time's running out on this wicked world, is it not? The things you've been taught, Doc, as an Adventist all your life, they're coming to pass. The things we have been raised on. The things, Graham, you were raised in it. And that old minister, he's just up there yapping his lips, right? Well, yeah, you're not saying that anymore, are you? Okay, the George Burnsides and some of those are gone. Friends, in this wonderful United States, the sun is setting on our wonderful freedoms. True or false? It's absolutely true. Our way of life and liberties are being changed forever. It's, as been pointed out, you think it's a glamorous life to travel around and preach the gospel all around the world. I'm telling you, you have to prove that you're not a criminal to get on an airplane. Isn't that right? Okay? We're under canon law already in this country. We're not under constitutional law anymore. Okay? And so we need to understand that just for reading the Bible, that Protestants could be yanked out of their homes and summarily executed in the Dark Ages. Friends, we're headed there again. We're going to be called the troublers. But you know, wouldn't you rather choose to remain faithful and go through trouble now to be able to sit down and have a conversation with your Maker in heaven and have him explain why those marks are in his hands and on his feet and what he really went through to save you and I, and how when we were tempted we had guardian angels, and he talks to us personally and pleads with us to come to him. You know, we do prison ministry. I'll be down there in a couple of weeks again. There's a young Hispanic that is in my gang unit. And I've been working with this young man for 3 years, and believe me, he was hard as flint for that first. He didn't want to hear this stuff. Oh, you weak Christians, you're just hypocrites. And, you know, he had a whole list of things. Well, guess what? The Holy Spirit is stronger than that young man's will. And over 3 years, he finally came to the light of the truth, has accepted the Sabbath, asked for vegetarian meals in the commissary, and they've accommodated us. You know, you were asking me, what do the funds go for in the prison ministry? Not only for my plane ticket down there and the rental car and all that. I failed to mention to you folks, the Starks, that it also goes, we've been able to put Great Controversies in there, Desire of Ages, Acts of the Apostles, Steps to Christ. We have a whole library with material that those boys can check out and read. Okay? So, and what happened was after 3 years, he made the commitment last month when I was down there that he now wants to be baptized. So we're going to have a baptism. So pray for Roberto Herrera. Next, the first weekend of July, I'll be down there doing a baptism. We praise Lord for the fruit that's being produced in that ministry. Because this man was headed straight for hell, friends, and now he's headed for heaven. Did Jesus promise to return? Has Jesus ever told a lie? He's going to do it. Let not your heart be troubled. The things we've seen tonight, yes, they're disturbing images on the screen. But let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may also be. Friends, you guys are not going to be living in a garage. You're going to be living in a mansion. Okay? And it's going to be seen by all the world. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. I'm looking forward to that day. Even so come, Lord Jesus. Isn't that the last words in the Bible? Can you imagine? The cities are on fire. They've been destroyed. People are being killed by the thousands at the brightness of his coming, and here you're looking up and your Lord is coming to rescue you. I'm telling you, I don't believe the picture does it justice what it's really going to look like. Heaven's a wonderful place, isn't it? It's going to be a wonderful place to spend eternity. The Lion and the Lamb are going to lay down. Okay, the little child will live to be 100. I mean, it's just a wonderful. The little ones, she saw them fly up to pick the flowers that would never die. Can you imagine? Use their little wings to fly up and get the flowers. Friends, up till now, every time we finish the presentation, it's been what lies ahead for our troubled world, and it's been to be continued. All I can tell you on this last slide is watch ye and pray in Mark 14:38. Amen?